The kitchen is narrow, low-ceilinged, smelling of old smoke and damp cloth. On the table, a piece of meat has been sitting there far too long, covered only by a thin rag. Up close, the fat isn't white. It has a dull sheen, like worn varnish. When the knife touches it, the surface gives with a soft, mushy sound. And a sticky liquid slowly runs onto the board, pooling into a thin slick that won't dry. The hand doesn't hesitate. It chops fast, like someone trying to outrun time with a blade. Coarse salt, a little pepper, anything strong enough to shut the nose up. The pan crackles when the meat hits the iron, and the smoke rises thick, clinging to the low ceiling, leaving a taste of metal and soot in the mouth. It isn't flavor, it's urgency. The meal has to happen before the day demands attendance, before the street wakes up, before work pushes everyone out the door. Someone eats standing up by the doorway, chewing without patience, swallowing with gulps of lukewarm water taken from the jug. The broth is thin and dark. Fat floats in faint rings. The meat seems tender on the outside and wrong on the inside, as if it didn't come from the same animal. On the second bite, the tongue finds a bitter note, stubborn, hidden under the salt. Still, the mouth keeps going. Stopping is waste, and waste is shortage. First comes heat in the face, then a sudden cold in the hands. The room tilts half an inch. Vision narrows. The legs feel heavy, as if the floor has thickened. Pain blooms in the center of the belly, squeezing, twisting, without warning, and without negotiation. The person drops the plate, tries to cross the hallway, but is already rushing outside into the dark yard, where the air smells of dirt and runoff. The body folds over, and the sound that comes out isn't a scream. It's a familiar sound, repeated in many houses. Inside, the pan keeps hissing, as if nothing has changed, and no one runs to put it out. Steam fills the room, mixing with the sweet smell of the meat and the mildew. Out in the dark yard, the throat burns, the stomach rebels in waves, and the lukewarm water comes back up. When it's over, after a few seconds, only weakness and trembling remain, as if the body has been emptied. The yard is still dark when the street starts to wake. Hurried footsteps strike the stones. Cartwheels creak. A vendor shouts the price before he even sees who's listening. From inside the houses come the same smells. Firewood, weak coffee, sweat that's been held in overnight. The same door that closed on someone, doubled over in pain, now opens to the day. And the body straightens again because the work clock doesn't wait for a stomach. At the end of the block, the air changes. A raw odor drifts in washed blood and standing water mixed with the sweet smoke of fat. That's where the meat comes from. The neighborhood lives near the slaughterhouse, and you don't need a sign to know it. Flies in a low cloud, skinny dogs circling, men in stiff aprons, boots marked with dark mud. The market sets up its tables under the gray light of dawn, and the cuts hang from hooks, as if they were just merchandise. The city grows faster than it can clean itself. Between the end of one century and the start of the next, more mouths arrive than rooftops, more carts than streets, more shelves than ice. At home, there's no cold to keep what preserves things is salt, smoke, and haste. Ice exists, but it costs, and it melts before it can cross the neighborhood. The meat travels slowly, exposed to the air, to heat trapped between walls, to time that always wins. And even so, it shows up every day, in the pot, in the smell rising from kitchens, in the taste that promises strength and delivers uncertainty. It isn't a rare accident. It's how the block eats. A man clutches his belly and keeps going. A child waits silently at the counter. One person's pain becomes many people's silence, and no one finds it strange for long. The meat doesn't start on the table. It starts behind a damp gate where the floor never truly looks clean. The animal arrives worn out, shoved through narrow corridors, breathing hard. The blow comes fast, and the rest is work. Ropes, hooks, pulling hands, blades that don't stop. Blood runs into shallow channels, mixing with sawdust and washwater, turning into dark mud that sticks to the soles of boots. There's no silence there. There's metal clanging, water sloshing into buckets, flies beating their wings wherever they can always find a place. The body is opened and relieved of its heat, but the day's heat moves right in. In minutes, what was alive becomes weight on a hook. The parts are separated quickly, more by rhythm than by care. A rag wipes the blade and goes back into a pocket. The same hand that holds the knife tugs the carcass, wipes sweat off a face, takes money from a middleman. The meat gets a cut, a name, a price, but it doesn't get time. Time is what's missing from the first step. From the slaughterhouse to the market, it travels however it can, in a wagon, on a cart, in baskets covered with cloth, jolting along potholed streets. Every stop is delay. Every delay is sun and air doing their quiet work. The smell shifts little by little, almost unnoticed by anyone who lives nearby. The fat starts to shine differently. The surface turns damp again, even when no one waits it. Flies follow, land, lift off, come back, and nobody has enough hands to chase them all away. At the market, hooks hold the cuts up high, but the air isn't clean. There's dust, smoke, splatter, sawdust on the floor to hide what drips. The pieces stay exposed, while the city buys slowly. The vendor cuts, wraps, takes payment, cuts again. The knife knows more coins than water. By the time the meat reaches someone's home, it's crossed more heat than shade, more touch than rest. And still it gets cooked, because it has to. The city depends on that flow, the way it depends on morning light and bread at the end of the day. For most people, there's no picking the freshest cut, no cold place to store leftovers, no money to lose a suspicious piece. The chain isn't an event. It's a daily mechanism. It keeps moving even when a body folds over in the yard, even when a child lies awake all night, even when the pan hisses over a mute, unspoken fear. Early in the morning, the hooks are already full, and the iron is already hot from taking on weight and letting it go. The meat sways slightly every time someone passes behind the counter. The motion is small, almost invisible, but constant, like the place breathing. Below, the cutting board carries old scars, dark grooves that water won't wash out. When the blade goes in, the sound is dry and familiar. A rag flashes by, wipes the edge just enough to keep going, and returns to a shoulder, stiff with grease and dust. The water used for washing comes in buckets. It isn't clear water. It's water that has already seen other hands, other surfaces, other scraps. It turns cloudy early, and nobody changes it every time. The vendor dips the rag, wrings it out, wipes the board, and in the next motion grabs damp coins, counts with a thumb, slips them into a pocket. The same hand goes back to the food. That's how it is, repeated, uninterrupted. Not from deliberate neglect, but because the pace demands it. Cut, weigh, wrap, take payment, cut again. The knife doesn't rest. Neither does the vendor's body. The smell is a layer. Old blood mixed with damp sawdust, charcoal smoke, sweat, leather. The flies aren't visitors. They're settled in fixed spots, forming a living film that lifts and lands again, as easily as the meat changes hooks. Now and then, someone tosses a handful of sawdust on the floor to dry what's dripping. The sawdust takes away the shine, but it doesn't take away what's there. Smoke helps pretend the air is different, but it doesn't erase anything, it only blends it. The buyer carries the bundle tight against the body, pressed to clothing. The walk home is short, but the sun is already climbing, and the heat is already seeping into the fibers of the paper, the cloth, the meat. At home, the cut goes onto the table, into a bowl, near the stove. The pan hisses loud, and that sound brings a sense of safety. as if fire could settle everything. The meat changes color, lets go of fat, takes on the smell of real food. The plate arrives on the table like it's normal. Later, the fever comes the way it does on so many nights. First, a chill that doesn't match the heat of the room, then sweat that soaks the shirt. The pain clamps down on breathing, as if someone has set a weight inside. The stomach tightens in waves, and the mouth goes dry. In the morning, the body gets up anyway. Weakness isn't news. It's a delay you carry into work. On the way, someone stops at the curb, leans against the wall, breathes shallow, and keeps going. At the market, another cart is already swaying on the hook. In the kitchen, another pan is already starting to hiss. Outside the market, the street doesn't separate food from waste. A dark ribbon runs along the gutter, sometimes slow, sometimes rushing after a bit of rain carrying thin foam and pieces nobody names. The smell rises when the sun warms the stones, sour, lukewarm, relentless. Wagons leave damp tracks. Horses stop and relieve themselves right there. Dogs sniff. Chickens slip out of yards and peck at whatever they find. Everything brushes up against everything. Everything crosses the same ground, and that ground comes home on shoes and pantems. Water arrives in buckets. In some places it comes from a fountain people fight for at dawn. In others, from wells that taste like iron. It's stored in big pots under a crooked lid and used for everything. Drinking, cooking, bathing a child, rinsing a pan. By day's end, whatever is left isn't the same color anymore. The surface is freckled with fine dust and tiny insects. No one picks out one by one. Most people swallow it anyway, because thirst doesn't wait either. In the tenements, air doesn't move. Narrow corridors, rooms holding more people than they should. Walls that sweat in summer and trap dampness in winter. The smell is a mix of bodies, wet cloth, and old food. When meat comes in, it doesn't get a proper place. It fights for space with hanging laundry, basins, tools, the water bucket. It sits on a short table sometimes, on a crate covered with a cloth that's covered other things before. Heat does what heat always does. Dust does what dust always does. And humidity finishes the job in silence. In the shared yard, when there is one, there's barely any breathing room. Trash piles up by the wall, waiting for a cart that doesn't always come. Food scraps draw rats, and the rats aren't scared enough. Mosquitoes find standing water in cans, in basins, in ruts. Children play there because there's nowhere else, and they put their hands to their mouths as naturally as they run. Their world tastes like everything around it. A bad meal doesn't stay on the plate. It carries through the whole night, as if it's walking the dark room. An adult turns over and can't find a position. A baby cries weakly, without the strength to cry loud. The mother wakes up, lights a candle, tries to give water, tries to soothe, tries not to make too much noise and wake the others. The night breaks into pieces. In the morning, someone doesn't get up. Not by choice, but because the body won't answer. Work loses a pair of hands, wages lose a day, the market loses a customer. And the house loses the rhythm that kept it upright. On the stove, the pot waits again. And the block keeps going, the way it always does. The day starts before the light has settled in and ends when the light isn't good for anything anymore. In workshops, warehouses, on the docks, the body works with the same repetition the city breathes with. Cracked hands, grip cold tools, nails dark with old grime, small cuts that split open again when the strain tightens. Pay comes up short and disappears fast, and the mid-shift meal is whatever fit in the bundle. A piece of bread, a bit of leftover meat, broth carried in a dented tin. Meat there is a simple promise. Something warm in the stomach seems to put weight back in the legs, seems to hold off exhaustion for a few more hours. But the promise comes with a shadow. After swallowing, Some people feel the heat rise the wrong way. A faint pressure behind the eyes, a bitter taste that won't quit, even with water. Nobody comments. The body learns not to announce weakness. A man leans on a doorframe for a second, breathes shallow, wipes his face as if it's only sweat, and goes back to the limber because missing work isn't rest, it's danger. At home, the broth is stretched to make it last. The pot takes more water than meat, and the salt tries to give the impression of plenty. The mother stirs slowly, not out of care, but so nobody sees the bottom too soon. She serves the youngest first, then scrapes what's left. If someone complains about the taste, she doesn't answer. She just pushes the bowl forward and looks toward the street clock, waiting for the moment to send someone to work or to find something that can get them through the day. There are nights when the child doesn't play. It isn't drama, it isn't sadness. It's the stillness of a worn-out body. The child lies there, eyes open without focus, belly tight, skin hot and sticky. When they stand, they sway as if the floor were too high. There's no crying for attention on the face, just a flat expression, as if the energy had been siphoned off little by little. The family learns to deal with it the same way it learns to deal with a leak. Laying down a rag, moving a bucket, waiting it out. Suffering turns into procedure. One neighbor recommends charcoal, another recommends bitter tea, someone says to boil longer, someone says not to trust certain cuts. The advice circulates like small coins, useful and not nearly enough. The next day, the worker comes back with the same bundle, the same hunger, the same hurry. The meat comes in again, as if it were pure necessity, and the threat stays silent, tucked into simple things. A smell that's a little too sweet, fat shining a little too much, a piece nobody can afford to throw away. On the same day, a few neighborhoods away, the air doesn't feel as heavy. The street is wider, the ground less broken, and the slaughterhouse smell doesn't arrive in full. It comes only as a distant memory on days when the wind turns. Meat moves through here too, but the route is different. It's chosen early, before the sun really heats up, and it arrives wrapped in more layers, handled by fewer hands. There's a place set aside for it, a clean surface that isn't used for anything else. A bowl that doesn't go back into the cupboard with a greasy rim. The kitchen is taller, it breathes better. Open windows let in light and a draft, and the heat doesn't get trapped up near the ceiling. A block of ice more, and clear sits nearby, kept as if it were ordinary, but it isn't. It melts slowly inside a container, and that cold water doesn't go onto the floor. It's used on purpose. The meat can wait a few minutes without becoming immediate urgency. It can be set aside. It can be smelled without rushing. The nose has time to catch what haste won't allow. If the shine looks wrong, if the fat feels a little too tacky, there's the option to refuse. It isn't a dramatic gesture. It's just a hand pushing the plate away, calling for someone to fetch another cut. Or simply changing the meal without an argument. Dishes are washed with cleaner water. The cloth gets swapped before it goes stiff. The knife gets a break between uses. The meal happens with less noise, more quiet, as if the body doesn't have to brace for the worst. But the contrast doesn't cover the whole city. Outside this airy kitchen, the market is still hot. The hooks are still full, and ice is still scarce where it would matter most. The wagon goes by, the bundle tightens against someone's clothes, again. And the block near the slaughterhouse keeps eating on heat's schedule, on the fly's schedule. On the fly's schedule. On the schedule where throwing food away is a luxury that doesn't exist. When it spreads, no one announces it as something new. It enters the neighborhood the way dampness does, the way smoke does, slowly, filling the cracks. First it's one house, then the one across the way, then the one next door. At the market, the vendor remarks that more people are asking for their meat, well done, as if it were just preference. On the street, children show up with washed-out faces and heavy eyes. and their quiet starts to draw more attention than any crying. A man misses a shift, and the next day he misses another. Absence becomes a sign before it becomes news. The names exist, but people use them the way they use everyday words, not as explanations. Bad fever. Caught something in the stomach? That sickness that drops you. The phrases change from mouth to mouth, and in the end, most of them point to the same place. The body can't hold. It loses water, loses strength, loses color. And when it was already worn down by heavy work, by too little food, by short nights, it only takes a small trigger to speed up the rest. A piece of meat that stayed too warm, fat that's shorn a little differently, a board that's seen more grime than water. The infirmaries take whoever comes. Chairs in the corridors, damp sheets, the weak smell of disinfectant trying to beat back other smells. The air is hot and still, and the sound is the sound of bodies trying to pull themselves together. Shallow breathing, low moans, hurried footsteps from people with no time to look at every face. Clenched bellies, cracked lips, hollow eyes. Some improve and leave too soon, because the bed is needed for the next one. Others stay until the skin loses its shine, and the voice is almost nothing. And then the funerals show up the way rains do, repeated and modest. Plain coffins, people moving slowly through the streets, a handkerchief over the face to hold back the smell of the world and their own nausea. There's no grand public mourning. There's a sad, practical routine that doesn't stop the city. The next day, the market opens again. The wagon passes again. The pan hisses again. The small daily failures keep adding up, and the result feels like a calendar. Certain weeks knock down more people, certain summers leave more houses with their windows shut. Certain mornings begin with the same metallic taste in the mouth, and the same mute fear of eating what you have. Over time, some pieces start to shift, but not in a hurry. After repeated deaths in weeks, too bad to pretend everything is normal, men show up with clipboards, stamps, and quick eyes. Inspections walk into slaughterhouses and markets without warning, sometimes strict, sometimes just to show they were there. Some stores get new rules: wash more, cover better, keep the trash farther away, hang meat higher, throw out what's already gone off. Paper says one thing, the day's heat says another. Larger cities start demanding more control, and control costs money. Cold rooms appear in specific places, ice in quantities that are less impossible, rail cars and trucks that shorten the time between the kiln and the counter. But it doesn't reach everyone all at once. First, it goes to the people who already buy early and pay more. Then, to the central markets. Later maybe two neighborhoods that still haul water in buckets and live with open sewage in the street. Some laws show up late, written down after the same thing has already happened too many times. They change hours, ban certain practices, impose fines that aren't always collected. Home refrigeration begins to exist for a few before it becomes routine for many. And for years, the two realities sit side by side without touching. Kitchens where meat can wait, and kitchens where waiting is danger. On some streets, the risk drops. On others, it simply gets talked about less. The city learns to hide certain things better, but it doesn't erase what had to be endured to get there. In the end, the gesture stays simple. A knife meets the board. A cut is separated as if it were just food. The flame rises, the fat snaps, the smell fills the room, and the mouth does what it has always done. Chews, swallows, keeps going. Chew. The body learns to trust and mistrust at the same time, as if every meal carried a small calculation nobody says out loud. The market may have changed shape, ice may have reached more homes, rules may have gained paper and stamps. Still, the risk doesn't vanish as if it's been solved. It just changes address, changes pace, changes who can avoid it and who can't. Somewhere, on some street, someone still cuts fast to outrun time, still cooks to smother the smell, still eats because they have to, and the rest happens in silence. If you've made it this far, you already know the kind of history that almost never shows up clean and neatly arranged. Subscribe to the channel so you're not at the mercy of luck when the next episode drops, because this series is building a map, piece by piece, and every video leaves details that change how you see the rest. And if you want to keep going right now, watch the next video that's already on your screen. Just click.